Basify is a Blender add-on for making bas relief sculpts from 3D models and depth maps or height maps in Blender 4 and above. It is made by artist and programmer Davis Burnside. Basify can be downloaded from the author's Gumroad shop. It's currently free. I'm not sponsored or affiliated with this add-on. This is an add-on I decided to look at after the author let me know about it. I'm more than happy to do this because it looks very useful. I have been trying the add-on out for the last several days and I'm very impressed with how easy it is to use. It has some useful features for helping with 2.5D relief sculpting, which is something I'm fascinated by and like to do from time to time. Relief sculpting is a method to create forms that stand out from a flat background. Essentially, the only areas that look 3D are seen from the top and the sides. If seen from the back, the object is completely flat. Relief objects can be mounted onto a flat surface. They are often used as decorative elements in architecture and seen on coin designs and jewellery. If you need more information about that, I wrote this article about it on my blog recently. Basify is useful in the rough design phase of making digital relief sculptures, as changes can be seen and altered on the fly. It also has some useful tools to aid in the later sculpting phase once the design has been set. There are some useful real-time relief modifiers that come with the add-on, and visualization and material simulation, options to export your relief as an STL, OBJ or a depth map image are built into the add-on as well. The add-on is organised into two steps for the creation of reliefs, a dynamic relief stage and a sculpt relief stage. I will attempt to cover some of the main features of Basify in this video with a model of a dragon I sculpted last year. If there are any things I miss or new features after this, you'll find them on the official Basify documentation page. Hello, today I want to talk about an add-on called Basify, but first I need to pose this dragon that I sculpted last year, which is a dragon based on Tolkien's illustration of Smaug. What I want to do is actually pose this model, which I've already rigged with Auto Rig Pro. I want to pose him in a flying pose, so I need to arch his back and maybe change the legs a bit, maybe arch his neck a bit. So I'm in pose mode in Blender and I'm just going to select different parts of the rig and use the rotation and move. I think I'm going to leave him like that. Now to save this pose I need to select all the bones and then create a pose asset, so I'm just going to put flying. So that will save it there. Before I export I need to make sure that the displacement modifier works, and I notice that I have the subdivision in the wrong place. I need that above the displacement modifier. I need to set a texture for the displacement. So this is the right displacement texture now, so that is how the details on the dragon should look, except that I need to increase the subdivision so that they come out nicely. I think I'll have to increase it to 3, which is quite big, but I can make the object file smaller later by using decimation. This will probably be fine for what I want to do anyway, because if I made it into a bas relief I'd probably need to neaten up the details anyway, and so that is how it should have looked really. I can probably improve this by using shade smooth as well. So now I need to select all the objects and go to File, Export, OBJ, and then that should save an object file with the geometry applied, which it has done, and the file is actually 545 megabytes, so that is probably going to be too big, so I will need to decimate it. So in ZBrush I have just imported my model and I'm just going to drag him out onto here. Then I need to put it into edit and go into make polymesh 3D. To make sure everything is solid, I will use Dynamesh on it. So I'm going to go to Geometry, Dynamesh, and pick a resolution here. So it's suggesting that. I could try that, or I could go a little bit higher just to make sure. I'll just try that. So that looks okay to me. I think that will be fine for the bas relief. Now to get this down in size so that it will be easier to work with in Blender and still retain the details, I need to use Decimation Master in ZBrush. I'm going to set it to 250k because that'll still retain the detail. To summarise, I tried 2 different programs. I wasn't too successful, so I think the best way to do this in future is just to use ZBrush. If you have ZBrush, then that's the program to use. So now I need to just export that decimated mesh, and I'm just going to keep it, well, I'm going to call this reduced so I know what it is. Actually, I'm going to call it decimated. And just save that. So that is now 20.4 megabytes on the exported file, and it's retained all the details. I'm in Blender 4.5 and I have the Basify add-on already installed. I installed it by going to Preferences, going into Add-ons, clicking this arrow, pressing Install from Disk, and finding the zip file that I downloaded from Gumroad. I can disable this add-on if I tick this at any time. One thing I do want to mention is that this add-on installs options in the key map section. I searched for Basify and I unchecked these options because I want to use the zoom in and out with my toolbox device. After you've installed the Basify add-on, it's a good idea to close Blender and open it again, because it will load these collections here by default if it's activated. If you don't want this to happen, then deactivate the add-on if you're not using it. The Basify add-on will add this to Blender by default. In order to add a new dynamic relief, you have to press N to open the side menu and then click New Dynamic Relief. Basify sets the units in the scene to inches by default, but they can be set to millimeters if you want. I'll leave them as inches here. Inches are more commonly used for CNC machining. Millimeters are probably more useful for 3D printing. These dynamic relief settings can be changed at any time. It's probably best to decide on the size before you start designing, but it's good that you can alter them on the fly. I want to set the width to 8 by 8 inches, so I'm going to put 0.008. In order to add depth maps or meshes, you have to add them here. There's a dynamic relief controller option. If you want to add a depth map, you can import a depth map from a file by clicking this and then load your image file. If you want to load a mesh, you can create from selected object. In order to do this, I have to add an object into Blender first. I'm going to click collection here because I want it to load into this, and I'm going to drag and drop my object into the scene. This object is very large, so I'm going to scale it first. Then I'm going to set the scale by doing Ctrl+A rotation scale. In order to make this object affect the dynamic relief, I need to select the object and then click Create from Selected Object and use Original Selections. This will then put the object under the plane and inside this grey box. It has a pink box around it, which is the box you will be moving and rotating to position your 3D object in the scene. The detail can't be seen very well at the moment because I need to increase refinement steps for that. This effectively increases the subdivision on the plane. For this early stage though, I don't want to do that too much because it might slow things down. This is how it looks from the top view. I am going to position and rotate the object so that it will look a bit better. I'm going to select this because that's the control object for this dragon, and then if I press R, I can rotate it on the axis that I can see here. I need to rotate it on the Y axis, so I'm going to say R and then Y. If I move it to approximately something which I think would be better, and then click the left mouse button, then I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis. I want to rotate him on the Y axis to get him to face forward. I think that will be okay. Pressing S will increase the size or decrease the size depending on which direction you drag. Pressing G will move the object around. I'm in top view, so I don't have to worry about which axis to restrict this to, as it's automatically restricting it for me. Now I'm going to load a depth map. I'll choose this shield that I created earlier. It has the option that I can fit it inside the relief, or I can set a fixed width and a fixed height if I want. I can scale this by using the scale in Blender like I would any object. I can also rotate it or move it around as well. If you don't want to use the hotkeys in Blender, you can use these here instead. There's one for move, there's one for rotate, there's one for scale, or there's a combined one. It might be easier just to use these separate ones if you're going to use the gizmo, because sometimes you can click the wrong thing on this combined one. I tend to use the hotkeys anyway. This bias setting will affect whether the depth map is lower or higher. If I set it to a really high bias, it will overlap the 3D model. You can also decide how strong you want the effect by clicking the strength slider. I'm going to increase the refinement steps here to see if I can get some more detail out of these objects. I think 5 or 6 would probably be around the level I would need. I can see that this is a bit too high for a bas relief. I'm going to have to make the dragon less pronounced. I can do this by sliding this depth slider here, and I'm going to hold down shift so that this is done in smaller increments and it's easier to control. Now I'm going to import another depth map. I made these words and I'm going to resize those. You can set the bias of different depth maps individually, so you could have elements that go under or elements that go on top. The thing I did notice after I added depth maps as well as 3D objects was that the pink box disappears from the object and the grey box has disappeared as well. I don't know whether this is a bug, but that's something to bear in mind. It might be best to position your 3D models before you add depth maps. Something else you can do with this add-on is that you can add modifiers. There's a simple Z smooth, which will smooth out the edges of an object that's been converted to a bas relief. You can disable or delete these at any time. They actually show up in the modifier panel. There's also an erode sharp cliffs option, which smoothens out the edges of things more. I found that the setting 0.130 was a bit better, not quite as pronounced, but still retained most of the details. You can also increase the blur effect. I'm just going to leave it at 0. There's a border rectangle fall off option. This sets a border around the whole plane, and depending on whether objects fall into it, they will start to fade out if they touch it. This distance can be increased or decreased. There's also a remove background option, which will remove the flat plane from around the edges of any objects or depth maps. There is a make mesh manifold option, which is quite useful if you have enabled that option. It adds a face to the back of the objects. If you're making an object like this, it might be better to have more depth on the underside though. So now that I've got my objects and my depth maps in here, I can decide to make it a sculpt relief, which will make a copy of it. This sculptable relief can still have modifiers added or changed in the dynamic settings, as long as it's still a dynamic. If you click the make selected non-Basify object, it will stop these dynamic options working. So now that I have made it into a sculptable relief, I can click the begin sculpt mode. This puts the object into the sculpt mode in Blender, and it also gives me some more options here in the Basify add-on options. So I've got sculpt settings, Basify face sets, Basify sculpting tools, and Basify stamping tools. These grey squares here are the brushes that come with the add-on. I'm just going to hide those by clicking general so I don't have to see them. You can find them in here as well. There are brushes for enhancing detail, soft smooth, XY move, Z move, and there's some stamping tools. I can sculpt on top of this in the sculpt room with any of the brushes I want to. If I had an image to go with this, I could use that as an overlay, so I could use it as a guide. If I click all affected faces, that will show the objects that have face sets. This option just stops them being seen, but they're still there. If I click by individual controller, that will show them separately. If I click by individual controller, I can select which object I want to see the face set for here if I click on it. With this option, I can just sculpt on anything without affecting the other objects. The enhanced detail brush will sharpen up details in the area I drag it. The soft smooth brush will smoothen out details. The XY move will only move in X or Y direction, which I'm not sure why that would be useful for a bas relief, but that's there. Or there's the Z move option, which moves only on the Z axis. I can't be sure, but I think the Basify add-on tries to disable any alteration of the flat plane of the object because it doesn't seem to work if I try to draw on that. It works okay on any object that isn't the flat plane. I'm going to click this Reset Z. That will get rid of any problems that I created on the flat plane. So something to bear in mind is that you can add things, but you shouldn't be trying to take them away from this flat plane. Back in object mode, I can use the post-processing options on the sculptable relief, which are export an object as an STL file, an OBJ file, or a depth map. I can also enable the advanced preview options. Here we can see a normal map preview. If I want to see this wood, I have to increase this data material mix to 1. Or I can view it as ceramic material. If I had an alternate image, I could tick this option and it would have an overlay of that image. This is the depth map that would be produced if you exported it as a depth map PNG. This add-on is more of a rough mock-up tool for sculptors who want to quickly try different designs using depth maps and 3D models and then sculpt their own details on afterward. So the export OBJ option would probably be quite useful because you could then import that into a program like ZBrush. Of course, the sculpting tools in Blender are very good, and these options in this add-on are quite useful as well, especially the face set options. I'm going to make this object a non-Basify object now. This means that these dynamic options won't affect this object anymore. So I could potentially create another dynamic relief and then create a different version or a completely different design in the same file if I did that. So if I was designing this and I wanted to try different variations, that would be very easy with this add-on. It's easy to try different compositions with 3D models and depth maps. If I add more objects to this, the ones that are above will overlap. I need to move this in the Z-axis so it's underneath the dragon. It's still overlapping one of the wings, so it's going to appear overlapping it in the bas relief as well. This might be useful for creating different overlapping effects. This is worth mentioning now because I can see this object has disappeared from over here. This means it's going outside the probe depth. I can increase the probe depth by sliding this here so that it will pick it up. To delete an object, if you don't want it in the scene, you would just press delete or X and it will get rid of it. For this object, I'm going to remove the background and make the mesh manifold. I need to click the dynamic relief before I press the make sculpt relief option. This makes another copy of a dynamic sculpt object. This one I made earlier is slightly in the way, so I'm just going to disable it in the view. I need more depth on this shield because this is going to appear as the zero plane otherwise. So I think it would be best to have some sort of depth added to the underside of this somehow. I'm going to make this selected a non-Basify object. Then if I go into edit mode, I can see that there's still geometry there. This is because the modifiers haven't been applied yet. So I need to apply them. Now that I've applied them, it's real geometry. If I want to select this underside, I need to go to select, select similar and normal. I am going to extrude this out so that it adds some thickness. This design is still quite rough looking, but it would be a good start point for a more detailed sculpt. I thought this would be a good opportunity to compare some different depth map or height map results, as I've been using some different software whilst I've been making this video. So the one on the far left here is the one from a 3D model in this add-on, Basify. It's probably the least detailed of the options I've tried here. This next one is a depth map made in Pixel CNC using a 3D object. This one is a depth map made from a 3D object in Relief Maker. And this one is a depth map made in Blender with the Buildiform add-on. Now, obviously the most detailed and the one that's preserved the most features is the one made in Relief Maker. I think for the purposes of mocking up designs, any of these would be useful. If you want a more ambiguous result that you could sculpt into and make a completely different looking design from the 3D model, then you might be better off using any of the others. However, if you want to be very faithful to a 3D model, then Relief Maker is probably your best bet. Even though depth maps from other software might preserve the details better than this add-on does, this add-on is really cool in that you can dynamically change the view, and try different compositions on the fly with other objects and depth maps. I think it's definitely a useful tool if you want to do this sort of thing. This add-on might give you a better idea of what view you need to create a depth map out of a 3D model for if you did decide to create a more detailed depth map in a different program. Once a model has been made into a depth map, it can't be rotated or changed, it's just as it is. So this add-on gives you the flexibility to do either. As I've said before, you can change the width, height and the depth anytime you like. Everything is editable on the fly. So if I wanted to add more height to this so that that wing goes on better, I can do that here. I think this add-on is really good for creating mock-ups of different designs that you might want to add details to and develop into something. It's very easy to use and I think it's got some really useful features. Thank you for watching.